Hello, friends. Welcome to the Thinning of the Veil podcast. I'm your host, Tia Smith, and we're excited. We've got a lot to talk about with Daryus Howard today. He is our guest, and although I haven't met him in person, I did go to the school that he teaches at, but it was Rick's College at the time, a lot of years ago, if that gives you any indication. But how we came across each other was that my previous guest, Anne Bradshaw, who is the author of True Miracles of Genealogy, uh, printed his story in one of her books. And she said to me, "Hey, you might want to get in contact with Daryus because he's got a cool story to share and cool thinning of the veil experiences to share." So I reached out to Daryus and he gratefully accepted my invitation to come on and be a guest. I'm going to turn it now over to him to tell us a little bit about who he is and how he started to get involved with the gathering. So, welcome, my friend Daryus. Why don't you tell us a little
Hi.
bit about yourself?
Okay, Tia, thank you. So there's kind of the story that is in Anne's book is not actually my first experience, but through the years, I've had cousins and stuff that'll talk about seeing people and other things, and I've never had that experience. I still haven't had that experience, and I'd always think, well, why don't I have any experience like that? Joseph Smith told us that it was very important for us to study about the spirit world and to understand it. And I'd always kind of pondered that and thought about that. But then I guess I had to tell about me. So besides that, I am a professor at BYU. I have been here when it was Rick's College. 1988 was when I started here. So I've been here 37 years. And I write books, mostly short stories for newspapers and magazines across the United States. Every week I send out stories, and some of them are like in Meridian Magazine, LDS Magazine, and some places like that. I have done the only really, I still call those fiction, even though they're built on true stories. I do take literary license, but I do have one nonfiction book about the Jaredites that I have written. That I've spent like 40 years researching them because they've been fascinating to me. But other than that, I am kind of working on one about the spirit world and the things from the prophets and stuff and what they tell us. But I don't know how long it might be. It might not get finished before I die. But anyway, so my very first experience I actually had, though actually predated some things with what was in Anne's book, because I was like late 80s, early 90s. The church had asked us to collect all the records in the ward and to put them on a these little um, we had these little 3 by 5 discs back in those days,
Our
and
technology back then.
yeah, and we were supposed to record on there and then send that to the church. Well, we had this old guy in our ward who had a big long box that was the width, and he built it himself, his width and of a 3 by 5 card. And it was just super long, and he had every member of the church who had ever been in that ward was in that box. And he's very protective of that box. And so, first off, the bishop had to convince him that he had to let us use them. I got the calling, interestingly enough, I was elders quorum president. I had been a ward clerk, but I'd been called as an elders quorum president, and so they asked me if I would accept to be called back as a ward clerk at the same time, so I would have both callings because I was the only one in the ward that knew how to use a computer. So I agreed to that, and we had a team of 4 of us. There was the old guy that had the box of cards, and then there were 2 others besides myself. One was at that time I was about mid 20s and he was about 40. And then we had an older guy, an older gentleman who was about 60 that was also going to work with us. And so I told him I could only do a small amount on Sundays because I needed time to be able to spend out visiting the elders in my elders quorum. And so I said, "Look, how about if we scheduled coming on Wednesday nights?" And the one of the guys, the guy that was about 40 years old, he said he would not do that. He said, "I will not step foot in that building in the dark of the night." The other guy said, he said, he repaired radiators for tractors and stuff, and he said, with it being summer, I can't, but as soon as we get to fall, I'll be able to do that. So we started out with doing a little work together on Sundays, and we'd get the guy that had all the records. We'd get him to give us a few. He'd only give us a few at a time, and we'd get those, and then we'd have one of them would read them to me, and I would type it in, and the other one would look over my shoulder and check my everything. So he's checking me while I'm putting it in. So it's kind of a nice way to correct. I started also doing some on Wednesdays. I was going to start that process. So I'd go over and get a few from the guy that had them. He'd only give me a few, and he says, I'll stay up all night until you get them back to me. So you got to make sure you bring them back before you go home.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's very possessive of them.
Well, I can understand. I mean, that's like information that's pretty sacred and
Right. And
like
he felt responsible, and he'd
exactly.
done it for like 20 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd take those to church, the church house, and I'd start punching them in. And then on Sundays, we'd actually also double check those. They double check against those, but so that there wasn't just one check. But anyway, I'd start putting those in. But the very first night, so I've got our kids in bed, and I go over to the church, and so it's fairly late. It's like 8 o'clock at night, and it's dark, and I go in there, and I'm starting to punch things in. Well, I'd been working a little while, and all of a sudden I heard a choir start to sing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't know we'd have choir practice, especially not this late. And I kept working and just listening to it. And it was very beautiful music. I couldn't quite make out the words, but it was very beautiful. And so I'm sitting there listening to it, and all of a sudden I got thinking about it a little more, and I thought, well, my wife's involved with the choir, and she never told me that they were having choir practice, and I'm the only bass. She definitely want me there. So I thought, well, I'll go down and see what's going on. Maybe somebody else is using the building or something. We're the only ward in the building. So I started walking down to the chapel, but it was kind of strange to me that as I got closer to the chapel, it didn't get any louder. And then when I opened the chapel, it was dark, but I could still hear this singing. And so I went all around, checked every classroom. Everything was dark. Nobody was there, and I just went back to my office. I wasn't afraid. It was a little strange, but
Yeah.
it was such beautiful music and stuff, and so I would work and listen to that, and I'd work all night. Well, this happened every Wednesday. This music, and the only person I ever told about it was my wife because I was a little, people
Yeah.
think
You
you're
don't want to be
nuts.
crazy. Yeah, I get it.
Um, so we got to fall, and the old guy that did the radiators, he said to me, things are slowing down. I'm going to join you this Wednesday. And I got thinking, I wonder if he's going to hear this, or is this just in my head? Or, sometimes even spiritual things can just be for you, and you just hear them in your heart and your mind and stuff.
Yeah.
But I thought, is he going to hear it too? So we got to the church, and we're working away, and all of a sudden the music started. Well, he started reading to me. He was reading them and then double checking them over my shoulder, doing both jobs. And he started reading them quieter. So I'm thinking, I think he's hearing this. After a little while, he finally stops and he says, "Are you hearing anything?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm hearing a choir singing." And he just goes, "Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful." He said, "I thought, my age, you think you could be losing it, and we had a good laugh. And then he asked me, he says, I told him, I said, "You can go look all over the building. You're not going to see anything." I said, "I already done that." Um, I said, "Do you think that's why maybe the other guy didn't want to come at night?" And he goes, "Yeah, maybe that's why." But as we over time we would talk, and we'd stop every night when we'd hear it. Every Wednesday we'd stop and we'd talk a minute and listen. And he asked me one time. He says, "Well, what do you think it is?" And I says, "Well, I don't know. It's the Lord's building on both sides of the veil. Maybe he can use the same building on the other side. I really don't know." Since then, I've actually kind of had some other opinions. I was at one time, I think it was in the church news, they used to have this thing called the genealogy moment or something like that. And in one of those, there was an article about a general authority that had been in Alaska, And he was in a small town. It was Sunday, and he thought, well, I wonder if there's a branch here. Maybe I'll just walk around the town. It's not that big, and see if I can find an LDS branch. And as he's walking around town, he hears someone starting to, or he hears people singing "Come, Come, Ye Saints," and he goes towards it, thinking, okay, that's obviously a good sign. It's LDS, and he gets there, and it's an old Catholic church, an old actually Russian Orthodox church, and he's thinking, oh, hey, we're just renting it. I mean, we've seen, we've done that on one of my little branches I was in on my mission. They rented a little church, and anyway, he walks in and nobody's there, and so he contacts church headquarters about it and explains what had happened, and they told him this has actually happened before. It's usually an indication of people wanting their work done. And they said, "Is it anywhere near a cemetery?" And he said, "Well, it's built right in a cemetery. There's
Oh,
tombstones all the way around it." And they said, "We'll send a team up to see if we can get the names off of the tombstones." Anyway, so I got to think about that, and I thought, well, maybe it has to do with the work we were doing, that they were singing because of the work. There's another story that is in my ancestral things. I mentioned it's in the book, the Logan Temple, the first 100 years.
oh yeah, I have that book. I have
And
that
my
book sitting on my
did you get it
shelf.
after I told you about it? It's a good
No,
book.
I've actually had
Oh,
it before.
you just haven't read it. Have you read it? There's this section in there where the Hale family, which is my mother's side of family, finished a great work. And that night, as the mission president's heading home, the he kind of looks back and thinks maybe the temple's on fire, and he runs back. He turns his horse around, goes back, and it's just lit up, and there's a choir singing. And he talks to church headquarters about it, and they said, well, did you finish a great work? And he tells them about this family finishing just thousands and thousands of names. And he says, well, the church headquarters told him that in a something like that, be given 3 nights of celebration, and they said expect it for 2 more nights.
Wow.
And the story in the book talks about how people would actually gather out on the lawn before dark, and with picnics and everything on that nice temple ground below the temple. And then as it got dark, the temple would light up, and they'd hear the choir singing. Well, I got thinking about those stories and thought, I'm wondering if maybe these people are celebrating and they're singing because of the work we're doing. Part of it, there was some experiences that happened along the way that made me think that might be the case. One in particular, it was on a Sunday, and we're working away, and they're one guy's reading, like I said, and the other would look over my shoulder, and so I'm punching in this stuff. And at one point, the other two start laughing, and they say, "Don't punch that in. Stop punching that in." And they said, that's wrong. It's wrong on this record." And I said, "Well, what's wrong about it?" And they said, "Well, the person that you were punching in that he was sealed to in the temple is actually his mother-in-law, and he
Oh,
did not like her. And they said he would probably haunt us for the rest of our life if we punched that in." So,
oh,
uh,
that's funny.
so I changed it, and we got it right, and we put a little note on that. We didn't dare change it right on the card because the other guy would, he
Right. He'd get after you.
we put a little note on it, the sticker note on it for him to make that change. And I, of course, didn't know him. I was new enough in the ward. I didn't know him, but they said, yeah, he wouldn't like that. And so they said there was quite a few of those corrections. As hard as that guy worked to make everything perfect, we're all human. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so that was my first experience. That singing. Interestingly enough, we hadn't quite finished the work before we went and we had to move buildings. They were doing some remodeling, and so we moved to a different building, and we continued to work there. When we came back a few months later on Wednesday nights, I never heard the singing again. It was
Really.
gone, and
What
my
I
wife
lo-
always said she wished she'd come over and heard it, but
Yeah, for sure. And what I love about that experience is that usually when you have these experiences, they're singular to you, right? No one else really experiences it with you. But the fact that your co-worker, for lack of a better word, your brother who came to help you with this work, also had the exact same experience.
yeah, I
That's
wonder.
truly remarkable.
I wonder if the other one had heard it too,
Yeah.
something like it, and maybe that's because he would not come over to the church on at night. Well,
No.
if it was a big word party and lots of people there,
Sure.
he
Yeah,
would
yeah.
come, but to
Yeah.
come and work there in the dark, he wouldn't do that. So
Well, and I love the pattern of music being involved because throughout the history of the church, music has always been involved in praising God, right? So when we're having thinning of the veil experiences, they can be experienced with a musical aspect to it from the other side of the veil as, redeeming songs of joy. Can you imagine what those songs are? They're probably singing them 24/7 over there, what with all the temples we have on the earth and the work, the amount of work that's getting done. So I love that you experienced music and also experienced it in real time with another member of the church. What a glorious experience. So, was that your first experience or one of your
that
first
was probably the
experiences?
first time I really experienced. Well, you can go clear back into my mission. There was times when I was in New York, and sometimes we'd be in some pretty tough, maybe dangerous situations. And there was times I never saw anybody. I never have.
Yeah.
But there was times I would feel my grandfather, who I did not know, this is on my dad's side, would say, "I'm here
Wow.
and I'm watching over you." And so, I would sense him almost saying that to me, and it'd give me courage, beyond what I thought I would have.
Yeah.
So I think that happens a lot. I think that they're around us a lot,
Yeah.
helping in those areas. Brigham Young talks about how if the righteous on this side, if you're righteous on this side, one of the greatest things that will occur in the spirit world is Satan will have no power over you. And if you are wicked on this side, when you get over there, you'll be totally in his power. You'll be one of his workers. So the righteous will go over there to help their posterity righteously, and the wicked will go over there to also work against their own posterity and those they know and love, which is kind of a strange feeling, but
Well, it's always going to be a part of this work because the law of opposition states
yeah.
that we're going to have opposing forces, especially when you're involved in this work, because this is the great latter-day work, right? In the final dispensation, all of this, all of these invitations have been placed upon our shoulders and also covenants and ordinances. So, of course, we're going to have those on the other side of the veil who oppose this work, who don't want it to happen, kind of warring with those on the other side who do want it to happen. It's like the war never stopped, it's continuing on, and we're in the middle experiencing both these forces. Because I always tell people when you're having thinning of the veil experiences, expect both, right? And so when you're going through these experiences, know ahead of time that you're going to have, opposite experiences from the thinning of the veil. But I love that they help us with the gathering, whether it's on the other side of the veil or this side of the veil. They're wholly involved in it at every step. We just need to have eyes to see, really. So
And
after
the
this
sorry.
singing, what was the next kind of few experiences that you had? And I love that you're teaching us along the way. So keep teaching us
Yeah.
this doctrine because it sounds like you've been studying it for a while.
Well, on Brigham Young talking about how either you'll be free of Satan or you'll be under his control. When we get over to the spirit world, he won't be able to hide himself from us. We're a spirits, he's a spirit.
Yeah.
So we'll see him. And so those who are righteous will know, I think they'll know him and be able to say, leave me alone. Whereas those who are wicked, they're just going to be part of his force. They'll
Yeah.
say, hey, come join me, and they'll do that. But my one in the book of that Anne has was a real interesting experience. This was about 3 or 4 years later. It would be 1997, but it started in 1996. So in 1997, the church had that sesquicentennial celebration of the saints coming into the valley, and they asked us to all do something in celebration for that. St. Anthony always had a big Pioneer Day celebration, and so it was just kind of something that would work in well with that. And as part of that, in 1996, as the church announced the kind of the kickoff for that, I felt this very strong impression that I should write a musical. And I thought, well, that's really crazy on multiple fronts. Number one, I am not a musician. My wife actually is. Number two, I have never even been in a play, let alone written one. And number three, what did I even write about? So I just kept putting it off and putting it off, and Lord started. It's like He started pushing me harder. And first thing that happened is just right after I'd been started getting this impression, the Pioneer Days was doing the musical Oklahoma, and this was in 1996, and the lady called and asked if I would be part of it, if I would play Judd, and I told her I wasn't interested. And anyway, so then she does what some people do, get your husband involved. They called my wife. She called my wife and asked if she would convinced me to be part of it. So we're heading up camping. My wife says, "Hey, let's pull in here to the stake center." And I said, "Why?" And she says, "You can try out for the musical." And I said, "Honey, I'm not interested." Well, she says, "Let's just do it." So we went in, and there was a guy that really wanted to play Judd, and then he's kind of a little bit like that in real life. And and I told my wife, I said, Allie Hackham's the funner part anyway. So when this lady calls and said, instead of playing Judd, would he play Allie Hackham? My wife said, "Oh yeah." He said that'd be the. So I came home. I said, "Honey, I didn't say I'd play it. I said it's the funner part." But anyway, that gave me some play experience. I did play it that year, and it gave me some play experience. But I thought I still, music and everything else. Well, anyway, time went on, and it's like I kept getting these promptings. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have these promptings, and I think I don't want to do this. And finally, my wife and my children are all in an accident, and I went to the hospital. We went through a lot of ordeal, as some of our children had to have some major surgery, and I was on my way to Salt Lake one morning about 4 or 5 in the morning. I was going down there to get a new van because we totaled our van, and I get this very powerful prompting, and I'm like, okay, what do you want me to write about? And before I mean, I had no sooner said that than my mind was so flooded with thoughts and things, a pioneer theme, and about my mother's family, the Hale family, the same family that I talked about on the temple, and it just was flooding full of thoughts, and I thought, I'm driving, I can't write these down. But anyway, I got home, and when I got home I bought the new van and got home that night. I got the kids in bed, and I just told my wife I'm gonna lock myself in the room, and I'm just gonna start doing stuff. So I just started writing other stuff, and I was not one to study family history. It just was that was an old people thing. But I just started writing all these thoughts and everything, and just the play came together within just hours. Really, the whole musical. I was writing so fast. I probably by the time I went to bed at like 1 or 2 in the morning, I probably had 50 pages of musical, and I had songs that came to mind. And and one song really interestingly in particular was I was given the music but told to wait. That I felt very strongly that the words were not yet. So anyway, I started putting this all together, I was writing about our family history, and I thought I don't even know how accurate this is. I just haven't read anything. Well, I had it pretty well all put together, music and everything, and my wife and another guy worked with me on the music, and I had the music, the lyrics, and I'd sing the music out into a tape recorder, and they would help. But I got to let's see, I guess it was November because it was Thanksgiving time. I went to my brother's house, and my brother's really into family history, really. And I was not feeling well. I asked him if I said, "Can I go down to your spare bedroom and just lie down?" And I did that, and I just laid there. I felt better laying there, but I couldn't sleep. And I looked up, and he had a bookcase full of the histories of family histories. So I pulled one of those down, and through the time I was writing the play, I'd make up names and stuff to put into the story because you have to have names for
Yeah.
people in the musical. And as I'm starting to read through this family history, their names that were in the book, and they weren't. I mean, I didn't know them. I thought I'd made them up, but I had obviously been getting inspired from somewhere. So anyway, we had a fun run with that musical that year. It turned out really well. I had a couple experiences though. At one point, because my wife and I had never done any directing or anything before. We actually worked with this other couple that had. The guy was actually a theater major, and at one point, they wanted to put in this I don't know a dance, and I felt a very strong impression. In fact, I heard a voice spoke to me so much I thought I thought somebody by me, and I turned to see who, and it wasn't. But the voice said, "Don't let them do that to me."
Mm.
And it was kind of a crazy dance, and so I nixed that, and then I did this other part, and the guy says, "Well, don't you think that's overkill?" Because it's a very tender moment as the one guy lost his wife, and I said, "I don't know, I feel to do it," and we did it, and it was beautiful. It really turned out well. But as I we finished that the last run of that, and I was scared to death because I'd never put myself in front of the public with any of my writings before,
Sure.
and it turned out really well. But as I finished the last production and the crowd's all cheering and everything, I felt something say, "We need to talk." And so I went into this other room, and at that point, I felt, again, I've never saw anybody, but I felt someone say to me, "You've done a good job. We have to go now. So keep working, keep trying to, think of family and do family things." And it just felt like I was in a group hug, like a whole bunch, of
Yeah.
people hugged me, and then it was gone. And I've never had those impressions of again, all those impressions of that all happening. So.
What was the one point where you were told not yet? Was there
Oh,
anything?
yeah, so this song was the music. Basically, we got to Christmas time, and my wife and I we were expecting a baby. We were about 20 weeks or somewhere near there. I'd have to ask my wife. I can't remember, but it was about 20 weeks. And my wife said, "I haven't felt the baby recently." And so we went in and we'd lost the baby. And that was really hard for us. And so I got my kids to bed that night. After I was with my wife, and I went home and got my kids all in bed, and I went up and I just cried. And I was in this room, and all of a sudden I felt a prompting say, "Now is the time to write that song. Now you get the words." And the words came so perfectly that we hardly had to change them at all. It was called "Rest Well My Baby," and it's a beautiful song for hope of the resurrection. It's basically the resurrection will come and I'll hold you in my arms again. And like I say, it's probably the only song we didn't really have to change anything in. It's a beautiful song. I don't even know if I had it. I don't know if you'd want it like add it at the end of your podcast or something, but
Oh
we
yeah,
can.
I would love to. That would be awesome.
I'll see if I can find a recording of it. Well,
Okay.
I know I have a recording, and
Okay,
we could
great.
add that at the end or something.
That'd be
But
beautiful.
yeah, and it was interesting because I guess I needed my heart to be tender and ready for the words that I felt came that night as I put that together. So.
Your experience sounds very similar to me about my friend Rob Ferguson's, where an ancestor came and gave him words and then a tune to the song. And that's called Ancestor's Plea. And my friends, if you haven't watched that episode, go watch the episode because it is so similar to Darius's experience, where he was prompted to write not just one song, but multiple songs, correct, for this celebration. And it was all about family members. And the names that you used, you thought you were pulling out of thin air, but you later learned that they're actual ancestors' names. And I love this experience of the other side saying, okay, it's not time yet. Your heart isn't in the right place yet for this special song to be written. And I believe that it is because when we have these experiences and we're given knowledge from beyond the veil, they can help us make things better than we could ourselves for obvious reasons, right? And it's all about the gathering, it's about the testimony of the Savior Jesus Christ and the resurrection, which they are wholly focused on. We're not, I mean, we focus on that here, but they are solely focused on that day where they can be brought back their body and soul together. And I love that idea that they are involved with music on the other side of the veil, making sure that we get the work done here. So, did you have any more experiences going forward from that?
Well, I just simple personal ones, little ones, but not nothing to the extent of those. We did have one time, and this is kind of a strange one. And I think what this does is it shows us how much we're interconnected with them, a lot more than we believe. But my wife, when we were getting engaged, she had a well, I wanted to get her a really nice ring, and I spent a lot of time working and trying to earn that ring. In fact, one winter, the national news kept saying that we're up here in St. Anthony, Idaho, was the low of the 48 states at 50 below. I was working at a dairy, and I'd work these 12-hour shifts, and because they had some people that weren't coming in, I'd sometimes turn around and work at two of them back to back, and so it was just hard work, and it was freezing, and it was miserable work. But I bought my wife this really nice ring, and um, we got to our 25th anniversary, and to her, the diamond meant the most because she felt like the diamond represented our marriage and eternity and everything. And as we were getting close to our 25th anniversary, she felt like that was getting loose, and so we went to a ring shop, and they said, well, they couldn't build it up anymore. They said it's just too worn. We needed to probably move it into a new setting. So she picked out one. We bought the settings. We moved over the diamond, and we actually put a cubic Z in the old one. I told her someday my grandkids would think their grandfather was cheap if they inherit that. But anyway, we moved it over to the new one, and it had a 7-year warning. And I thought, well, this one's lasted us 25 years, so it'll probably last 25. But she was teaching up here. She was teaching elementary music methods. She now teaches music workshops about directed listening and primary all over the church. But she was up here teaching the college, and she calls me at the end of my class, and she's just in tears, and she says the diamonds got out of my ring, and it had been 7 years and 1 week since we got it, so it's just
Mhm.
past the warranty. And so I go over there, and I got on my hands and knees and went up and down the carpet, and it's nothing. I actually went on my hands and knees all the way out to the car, which I'm sure the students thought I was really strange. But we searched her car, we searched the house for 3 days. We hunted for that diamond, and I finally told her, I said, "Honey, we gotta quit." And so we went to, kind of back to normal life, and my wife that night, I can remember when I told her I had to quit. Like she just cried, and she cried a lot that night, and it just kind of broke my heart. And so when I got on my knees saying my prayers that night, I said, "Heavenly Father, I know to you it's just a rock. It's just a piece of this planet." I said to me, "Yeah, it means a little more. I worked hard for it." But I said to my wife, "It just means the world." I said, "Is there any way you could help us?" Well, the next morning we got up. Now, my wife had a daytimer that kind of ruled our lives, and she had this footstool, and we would sit down on Sundays and go through everything for the week. And if anybody had any adjustments at night, we would make those adjustments. And then she'd turn around and sit it on the footstool so that, especially for me, so I could come up and look at it and go, okay, let's see, I need to pick up this child at this time and get them to this, or whatever, because I don't know, but guys really have my wife is really good. She can see the whole picture. She keeps everything in mind, but me, she'll know this is this day, this is that day, this is this day, and I'll know it's Tuesday. That's about what I know, and so I have to have that daytime come up and look at it to remind me what I'm doing that day. And she that night before she'd sit on the footstool like usual before we went to bed. But anyway, I was down making pancakes. So we had at that time we had 8 children. Six of them were going to school, and we had uh, three little foster children that were living with us, and we had two little girls from down the street who had come over for breakfast because their mother didn't get out of bed. So we just invited them to come to breakfast, and they'd ride the bus with us. It was really cool because the bus, I mean, if I was ever late, I mean, we had so many kids that we were half the bus. They wait for us. So they're very patient. I think I was gonna have to run to school and know the bus would be there waiting. But anyway, so I'm in making pancakes, and Donna would shower, and then she'd come down and start doing hair and signing notes for school. And but anyway, she comes down from showering, and she comes out, and she's like, "Honey," she said, "look what I found." It was the diamond, and what had happened is that book had been folded shut. It had been set in her there in front of her chair, so you couldn't miss it. And the diamond was sitting on top of it, the only place we would have ever seen it.
Wow.
And that night, when I thanked our Heavenly Father, I said, you know, thank you, and I felt Him say, "I let those who love you, who've gone on, help you." And I think He does that more than, that interconnection. Our Heavenly Father, being a parent, and all of us being parents understand this, that if something is important to your child, it's important to you. My kids had this teddy bear. It was the ugliest, rattiest, tattiest little teddy bear. But everybody, if somebody got sick, everybody had to have Toby, because he was. So we were disinfecting that bear and then passing it to the next child, and they'd always have. And it was so ugly. I was almost embarrassed to have it in public. But on the other hand, I'd about give my life for that stupid bear because
Yeah.
it meant something to my kids. And I think our Heavenly Father is the same way. And I think a lot of that He helps us with comes from this connection to those who love us too, who have gone on. So I have no doubt that, you know, and it's a real strange story. The diamond, doesn't, it's not a world life-changing event, but to lose one, but to have our Heavenly Father care enough and to have those who love us who've gone on, have Him let them, show their love to help us. I think that's what meant more to me than anything
Yeah.
than the diamond by far. But
Well, they're solicitous for our welfare. I think that was Joseph Fielding Smith who said that. They know us better than we know them. They can see us better than we can see them, and they are solicitous for our welfare. So, all of these experiences that we are experiencing in mortality, first of all, they've gone through it themselves and they know how we're feeling. And second of all, they're going to do everything in their power, right, to help us even in the little things. And I think if we could have our eyes open more than we do, we would see the frequency of how often they're actually around. And we are never really alone because they are always there working with us, helping with us, comforting us, being sent from the Savior, right? So, in your experiences and your studies of your book that you're currently working on, because this is interesting, my uncle, who just passed a couple weeks ago, he was also writing a book on the spirit world. And he would tell me a lot in his research what he was learning. He would actually go teach it, a class of it. He was a seminary and institute or seminary teacher. And he then used that to teach others after he retired. But he was talking about the spirit world. Tell me one of the things, one of your most favorite things that you've learned in studying and reading for this book.
um, I told you about Brigham Young saying that, the greatest event would be that we would not that we would Satan would have no control over us if we were righteous. And I look forward to that. I hope that I'm righteous and that I'm, joining the team. But to Brigham Young, interestingly, he's in reading some things about him, he said the second most important thing to him, and this kind of shows his humor and stuff,
Uh-huh.
is he said, "You won't stub your toe." And I laugh at that because as I get older, I tend to like stub my toe and fall a little more in a few things. And I think
Yeah.
Brigham Young had a little bit of a sense of humor on that. But the the concept of getting over there and working. My father, I had a well, my father was a missionary. Like nobody I can even tell you. He loved missionary work. He served in the 1930s, which in the South, he was in the southern states, and he served when there was a time when missionaries are actually still being killed.
Oh, wow.
And he had one area that he served in, and maybe I can tell this, try to keep this a little bit short, but he and a companion were asked to go to a town that had a little tiny branch, but they was struggling because anytime they got missionaries in there, the missionaries would eventually be driven out. And he was asked to go down there. He says, this little branch needs some help. They need new members. And so he and his companion go down there, and on this certain on their P day, they go to the post office to get stamps. And there's a postmistress there, which kind of tells you something about her. In the 1930s, the post office was one of the main hubs of a town, and so there was very seldom a postmistress because women didn't really weren't given those kinds of assignments. But anyway, she sees them, and she approaches them, and she says, "So what are you boys here for? You're here to get some new wives?"
Mm.
Well, my dad, he'd always, in his missionary work, he always lived by three philosophies. One, he said, never apologize for the Lord. He'd always say, if the Lord has something to say on the matter, use his words. And the third thing he said is just don't be afraid. You're on the Lord's errand. You're in his hands. So living by this philosophy, he says that in his old farmer vernacular, he would call her a handsome woman. When he uses the word handsome for a woman, it means she's highly educated, well dressed, beautiful. And he said he turned to her and he says, "Well," he said, "I think polygamy is probably one of the greatest things that happened in the church." And this lady she's really upset. She said, "You better explain yourself." And by this time, there's a group gathering that's getting kind of hostile. And my dad said, "Well," he said, "the nice thing about polygamy is it keeps the weak-minded people out of the church." Wow, that just really, she was highly educated and didn't consider herself weak-minded. So she said to him, we need to talk. So they set up an appointment, but unknown to the missionaries, it was a setup. As they get to her house, which is one of these big southern homes, the verandas and all that, and all the elite ladies of the town are out there around sitting around tables smoking. And she sees my father coming. She grabs him and hauls him right up in the middle of these ladies. And she said, "Now, young man, tell my friends what you think of tobacco." Well, of
Mm.
course, in the South, and I've had friends from the South who say, you don't diss somebody's truck, you don't diss their horse, you don't diss their dog, and you don't diss tobacco. So my dad, living by his philosophy, turns to D&C 89 and he reads, "Tobacco is for use in sick cattle." Well, you can imagine how that went across with all these ladies in their beautiful evening gowns and sitting out there smoking. But the lady that had confronted him on it, she started to laugh and she goes, I've always hated tobacco. She said, "It's good to know the Lord has his same opinion." Well, from then on, she made it clear that as far as she was concerned, the missionaries were to stay and everyone was to leave them alone. And my dad later found out she was the wife of the governor, and she ran the town, and nobody dared defy her. So the missionary work started really booming, and down there now there's steaks and everything. Well, my father, uh, later on, they went on a mission. My parents, my dad retired. It was really hard for him, and I said, "Why don't you go on a mission?" And he goes, "Well, because when I get out there, they won't let me teach the gospel. They'll think I'm too old, and they'll set me in a room where all I do is shake hands with people who are already members." And I said, "Dad, put your life in the Lord's hands." It's kind of like we reversed roles in life because that's what he'd always tell me. My dad, when I'd go over to see him at where he'd worked, he had a business. I'd go over there maybe at lunchtime from school or something, and they'd say, "Well, he's off with the Catholic father and Presbyterian minister to talk about religion. He's bought him dinner for the day." I mean, that's what he'd do.
Yeah.
And so anyway, my dad, he said, I want to teach the gospel. I'm going to go out. And I said, "Well, put yourself in the Lord's hands." Well, they get called down to Georgia, and they're working in an employment center. And guess what? My dad's job is to greet the members coming in and shake hands with them. And he hated it. He'd call me all the time and tell me off. One day he got a very strong prompting that they needed to go down to this lady's grave down in Florida. And and the day he felt they should go happened to be a P day, and so the mission president gave him permission, and my parents went down there. They started really early in the morning because there's a ways, and they're older and didn't drive late. So they get down to this cemetery, and it's a huge, huge cemetery, and they don't know where to go.
And which
And so
lady again is this? Is
This
it?
is the one that had confronted him
Okay.
on,
Okay.
she
Yeah.
had never joined the church. I gotta tell you this about her. She'd never joined a church. None of her family had, but she had become very supportive of the church. In fact, she sent missionaries on missions. She paid for many missionaries. But she had some things she just could not seem to give up to actually join the church, and so she loved the church though, and paid tithing, all sorts of things.
Wow.
But anyway, my father, my parents saw this guy cutting grass. They went over and asked him where this family was, and because her husband had been governor, they, they knew. He knew the family, and he pointed out where they were, and he said it's right by those people over there. And they looked, and there was just this one other group of people in the whole cemetery, this huge cemetery. So they go over there, and my dad immediately starts to engage the people in conversation about, the plan of salvation. I mean, we're better than a cemetery, right?
Yeah. Perfect.
And so he gets talking to them, and the people are, there's one of them, the oldest one, the oldest son, the oldest boy, he's just staring at my dad, and finally he goes, "You're that missionary that my mother loved so much." Well, see, they find out these are her kids. And they said, "We haven't been
Mm,
here in 10 years. What's the odds of us coming on the very same day?" So they talked a long time and shared stories. And then, as my parents were getting a little concerned about getting back before dark, this oldest son, he said, "Hey, before you go, can you do something for us?" He said, "Before mother died, she made us promise that we would do something." And he says, "None of us ever joined your church. And so we really don't know what she's talking about. Mother knew more about your church than any of us." And he said, "But she made us promise we'd have her work done in some kind of temple building. Do you have any clue what she's
wow.
talking about?" Well, of course they did. And so my mom told them what she'd need and the records and so on. And they said, "Well, we have our dad's, I think it was their dad's youngest sister was the last of that generation." And they said, "She's working on lots of that. We'll get you in touch with her." Well, I can remember my dad coming home that night, and he called me, and I think he's going to chew me out again because he's hated being down there just shaking hands with people. And he told me the story, and I was like, "Dad, I think I think for the first time, I said, you found your point down there. You found
Yeah.
why God sent you there. God doesn't allow people to get in His debt." And I think and my dad used to tell me the first part of the story for years and years and years while we milked cows. And I got to see more of. I don't even think it's the ending yet, but I've always thought, why did God have Mormon do all that abridgment? Why did he have him when he's a general in the middle of war trying to save his people? Why was he chosen? And I think it's because Mormon knew the end of the story.
Yeah.
He is the only one that knew the beginning to the end. He knew the end. And I thought, with my dad, I always thought I knew the end of the story, but now that I see more of the ending, I don't think it's even the end yet, that it's so powerful. And knowing the end of the story, being the author, is powerful. And I think that's why Mormon, was the one that was called to do that amidst all his things. But anyway, my mom actually got hold of this aunt when they got home from the mission. And the aunt said, "Sure, I'll give you all the stuff, but I want you can't just do her work, that their mother's work." So they said, "You've got to do everybody I've been working on." Because she says, "I know how much," I think it was her sister-in-law, "I know how much she loved your church. You've got
Oh,
to do it for everybody." And she said, "Including me." And my mom says,
wow.
"Well, she says, I'm not sure, we have to have permission of the next of kin." And she goes, "Well, who's more next of kin than myself?" So eventually my mom
True
did get
that.
that. She got the work with this lady, and it wasn't very long after she got it and stuff. The old lady passed away. And about a year later, my mom had it already, and I had mostly daughters, and my brother had sons, and we joined my parents at the temple, and I got to watch my dad. He couldn't get in the water to do the baptism, so I got to do the baptism, baptize my daughter for her, and just to watch the tears just pour down his face, and he did get to do the confirmation. But anyway, back to the spirit world thing. My mother, when my dad passed away, it just seemed like he was so busy doing missionary work that my mother and I both would sense my brother who'd passed away be the one that would come. He'd come to watch over my mother. He'd come, and I'd sense it. She'd sense it, and she goes, "Son, do you think your dad will even come when I die?" And
Yeah.
that was her big concern. She
Yeah.
wanted to know that he would be the one to be there. And the day my mother passed away, we were kind of, she was in an assisted living here, and my wife and I would, take her to everything and get her books out of the library, take her, get her shopping done and anything. So we're, grown very close to her, and we knew her time was really short. My nephew came and helped me give her a blessing, and after we gave the blessing, I very powerfully heard my father said to me very clearly, "Son, I'm here.
Mm.
It's me." He didn't send my brother in his place. He came for my mother, and that was a very very tender moment to me. And like I say, I've never seen anybody, but I've gotten powerful impressions, powerful things,
Yeah.
and it's nice to know they're close. You know,
Yeah. And I think there's various ways that the veil parts. I mean, it's seeing, hearing, feeling. It can include all or some of the senses that we experience as mortals. And maybe one of the reasons why your dad, and this is just me thinking out loud, didn't come for a while is because he was busy doing missionary work. He was doing the thing that
yeah.
he loved, right? And I love that you mentioned Mormon because when we're talking about the abridgment of the Book of Mormon and he was so busy being a general, maybe the reason why he was chosen is because he, with firsthand experience, saw the carnage of war and death and the evil of it all. And then abridged according to what the Spirit told him, and within that context of bringing joy and peace to all of us who would experience that kind of mortality.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that he had that point of view while he was abridging, because we can look at it and see the importance of the gathering, the importance of the covenant, the looking forward to our dispensation and the restoration of all things. And that is what he held on to in the middle of his horrendous experiences, I am sure. So,
Yeah, and I look at him, how as in his writings he'll tell us, the covenants his people had made, the covenants God had made with them, the prophecies, and how they're all being fulfilled. And I think it gave him hope to be able to say these prophecies pertaining to the resurrection and everything else still lay ahead,
yeah,
but everything else to this point has God has fulfilled, and He will fulfill these.
yeah,
And knowing that end of that story, I mean, he knew that the prophecies were fulfilled. He was there and it
yeah,
was happening.
yeah.
Gave him so much power in the writing that no one else could in any other way.
Well, and it should do the same thing to us then. We are literally fulfilling prophecy as we're gathering scattered Israel on both sides of the veil. There's power in the gathering and in the experience and in the fulfilling of prophecy. And that's really what this podcast is about, is this is a fulfilling of prophecy of generations of people testifying of the miraculous indications that God is always in the gathering, that these experiences that you've shared today are evidence that the prophets, including Enoch, because we have talked about Enoch a little bit in this last episode, his eyes were upon the fulfilling of the prophecies in the latter days. His eyes were upon us. The temples that are dotting the earth are evidence of the love that God has for all of his children since the beginning.
Yeah.
And I feel so grateful that I'm a part of the miracles that are happening in this last dispensation, that my eyes can actually physically see instead of just my visionary eyes seeing. I'm in real time participating in these glorious events leading up to Zion. So thank you so much for joining us today. How have these experiences strengthened your testimony in the Savior Jesus Christ?
Well, having felt of his power and the love of those who've gone on, I think more than anything, it's given me a strength of understanding of the importance of family and the covenants that we bind us to them to us. And I think more than anything, these experiences, and like even Heavenly Father helping my wife and letting them help my wife with the loss of her ring, her diamond, I think just shows that they're there. They love us. God loves us. And, we're all in it together, both sides of the veil.
Yep. They're in the small details and the large ones. So thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited to hear your song. I myself have lost a child and, well, two. And so I'm excited to hear that gift that was given to you to write this song about all mothers who have lost and fathers who have lost babies on both sides of the veil.
We
They,
lost, yeah, we lost two. We had a little foster girl that was, oh gosh, and this is going to be hard for me. She was really sweet. She was about 2 years old, about 19 months. And when I'd come home from work, she would meet me at the door and she had chubby little fingers and she'd drag me to the couch and she'd climb in my lap and if any of the other kids got near, she'd slap them and say, "My
Mhm.
daddy." That was her time, except for the one that was just about her age. And while she had uh, been through her mother had been on cocaine when she was born, and she had a weak immune system, and she died in her home on a Christmas morning. It was really hard, and I don't think in my life I'd ever questioned God too much before. Um, but I would try to be strong for my family. When I go out and feed the horses, I'd stay out there for a long time until my wife would get worried, and I'd just pray and say, God, how could you do that? How could you take our little girl? And he one night, as clear as anything I've ever felt, I felt him say, "She's my daughter, as well as she is yours." And even though we were trying to adopt her, he said, "I love her even more than you do." He said, "You got to trust me that I did what I felt was best for her." So, and that's always been comforting to me that, he's in control. Sometimes when you lose little ones, especially, it's really hard, and you got to trust him that he knows what he's doing and he understands.
Yeah.
So
And that's the commonality with uh, not only us here and now, but our ancestors. I mean, the amount of children that were lost on the trail, the amount of children that were lost in the massacres, the amount of children, it's these empty arms that are comforted when we are restoring the relationship between father and son, mother and daughter. And I'm super grateful for the gospel for that very reason, because that pain that you experience, and I haven't shared my experience yet with everyone about my twins, and I will at a future time, probably in a few months. But that pain that is overwhelming and inconsolable at times. But the reality is, the Savior Jesus Christ made it all possible for us to be reunited. And I will see and raise my children someday, and you will also have the opportunity. And that is the glorious truth of the doctrine of Jesus Christ, for which I'm very, very grateful. So
I don't know how people without the gospel
I don't
survive
either.
things like that.
I don't either. I
So
think that it's probably super debilitating in so many ways. So, and that is our charge, to go spread the joy of the gospel to everyone on both sides of the veil. So, super grateful to live in a time where I have that knowledge and I have the ability to help other mothers on the other side of the veil. That's my favorite thing when I'm doing family history, is restoring children to their parents. It's just, I do this little happy dance that I have. Darren's like, "Oh, you found another one." I'm like, "Yep, it's been a good day." So thank you for joining me. We'll include
thank
that
you.
song at the end of this video, and keep in touch. I'm super interested in your book about the spirit world. I've studied that quite extensively myself, and I find all of it so fascinating. So thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Oh, my friends, upcoming next week, we're going to be talking about translation. And I'm not talking about translation of scriptures. I'm talking about Enoch's kind of translation. I'm excited to talk about that. We are going to continue to talk about different doctrines that Enoch brought to our minds in the story of Enoch and his experiences as we look forward to Zion. Today, though, as we have listened to Darius and if we've studied Enoch as a patriarch, I want to wish all of my friends and dads out there a happy Father's Day. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for exhibiting the power in the priesthood that bless us all. And we cannot do it without each other. So thank you to all my fathers, both blood and others who have affected my life. And I hope that you have a very happy Father's Day and know how grateful we are that we have you in our lives. So, all right, Darius, my friend, we will stay in touch. And thank you for being my guest today. We'll
Thank
see
you.
ya.
We'll see ya.
Bye.
Rest well, my baby.